Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another edition of Index Office Hours. Today is the 14th of January 2025, the second week of 2025. I hope you all are having a fantastic start to your week, to your year. Sorry, I should say. It's 2025. It's great, and we're almost at episode 100. 200. We're at 190 at the moment, which is incredible. We might do something fun for 200. I think it's a big number. GRT recently crossed that number. It's 203 right now, which is pretty exciting. So if anyone is new to Index Office Hours, this is the town square for graph ecosystem participants to come together and discuss the most important and relevant topics for indexers. As always, this is a conversation and we do love participation. So folks do get involved in today's conversation via the chat box, which many of you already are. Or if you would like, feel free to unmute your mic and I can help you out if you're having any challenges there. Today will be an engaging conversation, so do get involved. As a reminder, this is a call that is going to be recorded and posted onto public channels like YouTube. So if you are concerned about privacy, please bear that in mind. And with that, let us all get into the exciting agenda. Okay, so as always, I give a shout out to the latest GRT IQ episode, and today's no different. We have Justin Bannon. Okay, that was reasonably easy for me to pronounce, which is why I felt brave enough to say his last name. And he is the founder of 𝗨𝗀𝗧𝗧 Protocol. So 𝗨𝗧𝗧 has been around for a long time, if many of you know, and they are doing decentralized commerce infrastructure, and their aim is an ambitious aim. It's one to replace traditional e-commerce intermediaries with minimal extractive protocols. So in that conversation with Nick, Justin goes through his background. He's a physics graduate from Imperial College London, and he previously transformed a $50 million company into a $1 billion digital platform before he got into the blockchain space. So a very seasoned entrepreneur. And so in that conversation, you'll hear a lot about his perspective on tokenization, obviously what he's working on with 𝗨𝗧𝗧 Protocol, and his views on the Graph Protocol. So please do check out that episode if you would like. And again, Juan is a superstar. He has linked both to the agenda and to the episode for GRTIQ. Thank you, kind sir. All right. Well, this is the moment where I would normally hand off to Anna, but today is for good fortune. I will be continuing to speak because I will also be covering Repo Watch today because Anna is out of office. So as for Repo Watch, I will pull up the notes at the moment. So this week we only had 2 new releases for the execution layer clients, and those are the following. So you've got Firehose Ethereum, which is on the list as SFETH / FireETH. And the new release is version 2.8.4. And you can read the summary on the Notion, which is linked in the agenda. And then the next update, final update for Repo Watch and execution layer clients, is the Arbitrum Nitro new release, which is version 3.32. And again, you can read that summary in the Notion. Anna has done us a favor and posted everything in there, so do check that out. Okay, that's enough for me. I've been waffling for a very long time. I will now hand over to Juan for our regularly scheduled Protocol Watch.
Thanks, 𝗨𝗀𝗧𝗧. Okay, getting into Protocol Watch. First of all, we have forum governance as always. We have 3 disputes that have been updated. There's GDR24, which I think it was the one with the long discussion around, how indexers are supposed to operate and, what are the expectations regarding underlying data. I think that one was resolved as a draw with a lot of caveats, mainly regarding, some charter amendments and some other stuff. So if you're interested in, all of the details, it's a lengthy discussion, but it's an interesting one. The link is in the agenda. Then there's GDR25, which is a new one. We're waiting for a response from the indexer. So far, no news. Then we have GDR22, which has been, discussed lengthily, and it's essentially going to be a slash due to lack of information or proof, rather than there's a bug that's on our side on the software, which it doesn't seem that way from all of the information that we had. We tried as hard to get as much information, but it was quite difficult to get enough proof to end it as a draw. Then on forum research, we have core dev updates. As normal, we have updates from all of the different core devs. That includes Semiotic, Streaming Fast, EdgeNode, Pnex, Messari, Geo, GraphOps, and many others. And then on the contract repository, we have a few open and merged PRs, mainly some CI changes, fixes, and docs updates, like removing the end-to-end batch from the README, fixing some end-to-end contracts, YAML changes, some cleanup to the payment collector and tab collector docs, etc., etc. For the network subgraphs, we don't have any new updates, so that's pretty much it for 𝗏𝗏𝗧. Is Paka around? I don't see him. Okay, I don't see Paka, so I'm gonna be handing over to 𝗏𝗀𝗧 now.
Perfect. Thank you, kind sir. If you could do me a favor, Rem, and just put yourself on mute, that would be fantastic. Amazing. Okay, so we have the good fortune of having Matthias, again, I've practiced pronouncing his name, with us today, and he is with EdgeNode as a protocol engineer. And as many of you have already checked out, if you are keen observers of the forum, an indexing payments GIP has come out, and so he's going to tell us all about that. And we would love to hear your thoughts, questions, as this is definitely going to affect many of you as indexers. So do get involved in today's conversation. So Matthias, feel free to take the mic.
Thank you very much. Okay, so hi everyone. I'm Matthias. I'm part of the protocol engineering team at EdgeNode. And I've been working on GIP 0081 lately, which is all about indexing payments. You might have heard a similar proposal being discussed earlier last year, and you might have heard a very similar thing being called DIPs, or direct indexing payments, with some minor differences. This sort of evolved from that. So I'm going to be presenting that. The GIP is up in the forum, as mentioned, so please check it out if you're interested. And also, if questions come up during the presentation, feel free to interject, and I'll try my best to answer them. If not, there's going to be a Q&A section at the very end of this, and we can go over all the questions then. So without further ado, let's get started. So what is this GIP all about? So 0081 is essentially a mechanism, or presents or propose a mechanism by which a gateway can pay an indexer to serve a subgraph. One thing that I want to point out early is that the gateway pays the indexer in GRT. This has been raised in earlier versions of this presentation as a concern, so I just want to be front with it. The proposal is to still have that transaction be in GRT. And this proposal also builds on top of Graph Horizon primitives. As such, it requires Graph Horizon to be deployed. And so the delivery timeline for this proposal, if it were to be accepted, is after Graph Horizon. Okay. So I've mentioned serving a subgraph, right? And this being a mechanism to sort of coordinate that interaction. So what is the current way of getting this done from a subgraph developer's perspective? So a subgraph developer today needs to research how much signal is required to get the subgraph indexed. Then they need to source that GRT, either through a grant or their own capital or other means. Then they need to curate the subgraph with that GRT. And finally, they need to monitor the performance that they're getting out of that sort of signal, and the indexer that has picked it up, or the subset of indexes that have picked it up, and adjust the signal accordingly. By this, I mean there's a bunch of dynamics here that can mean that the same amount of signal will perform differently at different times, right? So it's up to the subgraph developer to monitor this constantly and in perpetuity, to be fair. And so this is a lot of complexity for them that we are trying to make away with this proposal. Now, although this mechanism, the curation way that I've just described, has some drawbacks, it is undeniably the sort of underpinning to the whole indexing market as we know it today. So this is not going away, is not being modified in any way, shape, or form by this proposal. It's just that 𝗨𝗂 𝗟𝗶𝗟𝗂 is a complement to this in the following ways that I'll explain now. So the motivation for this 𝗨𝗂 is essentially to come up with a developer-friendly way to get subgraphs indexed. And developer-friendly can be defined by the following sort of characteristics. We would like to get regular and predictable billing for developers. We would like that to be in OPEX instead of CAPEX for them. So that by that I mean a monthly payment that they can understand, as opposed to having to have some capital parked in curation. We'd like them to have a choice on how performant their subgraph needs to be, and this is a dimension that has multiple dimensions in itself. So performance can be measured in latency, error rate, availability zones, and so forth. So we would like for a mechanism to have those into account. We would also like developers to pay the gateway in fiat. And mainly that's a convenience thing, because developers are already paying the agent node gateway in fiat. So that is simpler for them to understand. And we want this sort of mechanism to be fully managed, so that they don't have to set up their own monitoring and adjust their own sort of curation or amount of money allocated to serving a subgraph. This is something that the gateway can sort of bring onto themselves and hopefully simplify the process by absorbing that complexity. So as I mentioned before, the motivation to develop this developer-friendly way to get subgraphs indexed is meant to be complementary to curation plus rewards. Since curation plus rewards underpins the current indexing market, we would like to think of 𝗨𝗂 𝗟𝗶𝗟𝗂 as supplemental income for indexers, and at the same time an alternative for subgraph developers. So when we set out to design this proposal, we immediately identified some concerns that need to be addressed for such a mechanism to exist. So at indexing and at query time, right? To begin with, the work required to index a subgraph is known in advance. This is generally the case by either party. So the subgraph developer doesn't know how much work it's going to require to index their subgraph, and at the same time, the indexer doesn't know how much work it is required to index a subgraph either. What we do know is that indexers can report the amount of work done after they've done the indexing, so they can track how expensive, for lack of a better word, has it been to index a subgraph after they've done the work. Similarly, query performance can only be assessed after the service has been rendered. So as a data consumer, I know how a query performs after I've performed the query itself. And so again, query performance can only be assessed after the fact, right? So gateways can assess indexer performance at query time, since they are sort of sitting in between data consumers and the indexers, and they can perform it in aggregate at the same time. So they are uniquely sort of positioned to pick indexes based on performance, if that is what we wanted to do. So with all of these concerns, we sort of set out to design the proposal. So again, indexing a subgraph, the amount of work done is unknown in advance, and then gateways are uniquely positioned to assess indexer performance because they are the middleman. Okay, so I'm not keeping track of the chat. So if there's questions, maybe someone can speak up. But if not, I'll keep moving.
Yes, Matthias, yeah, just I will keep an eye on the chat, and if there are any questions, I'll mark them as question marks. And then whenever you want to pause, I could just direct you to the question. So yeah, no worries about monitoring the chat. I'll do that.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so moving on. Underpinning this whole mechanism so that gateways can pay indexes to serve a subgraph is what we're calling an indexing agreement. In its most simplified version, it has this 4 items that I've presented here. It stipulates which subgraph has to be indexed. It sets a price per unit of work done indexing. And I'll talk about this more later in detail, but essentially it can be a proxy or a compute unit or a subgraph gas unit. And there's more work to be done in this area, but conceptually you can think of it as a unit of work done or a price per unit of work done. And then there's a bunch of clauses set to protect the gateway. And these are the maximum amount payable for the initial indexing and the maximum amount payable for the ongoing indexing per epoch. These two are in GRT, again, because the whole contract is set out in GRT between the gateway and the indexer. Now, these two maximums are set there because what can happen is, since neither party knows in advance at the time of agreeing to an agreement how much indexing a subgraph is actually going to cost, we want to set an upper bound to both the initial indexing and the ongoing indexing per epoch, so that the indexer knows that if they've crossed that bound, they would need to stop indexing, since they can no longer expect payment beyond that. And the gateway can sort of protect their escrow balance, or the amount they're willing to pay to get a subgraph indexed, to a certain limit. Now, if this were to happen, and if an indexer were to hit the max amount, the gateway will have to pay out that maximum amount, and they'll get no sort of queries available. They won't be able to run queries against that subgraph, but at least they are protected from sort of indexing costs going up and to the right into infinity, right? So that's sort of part of this design. Okay, so that be the indexing agreement. And how does this all work together? Essentially, the happy path for this is the gateway is meant to escrow funds to be used towards paying those indexing agreements. The gateway then offers indexing agreements to indexers based on a selection algorithm. The offering of these agreements is done off-chain. The selection algorithm implementation is up to the gateway. I'll cover the selection algorithm a bit more in detail later on in the presentation, but essentially it's up to the gateway to pick the indexers. And then the indexer accepts the indexing agreements that have been presented to him. And then the indexer gets to work and finally starts posting proof of indexing plus declare work done to collect payment from the escrow. So this is the happy path essentially. And the idea is that payment is guaranteed by the escrowed funds. The indexing agreement stipulates exactly what is meant to be done as work and what are the maximums amount payable for this. And then so the accepting of the agreement is on chain. So both the gateway knows when an indexer has accepted the agreement and is sort of bounded by that agreement. And then the indexing agreement posting the proof of indexing is very similar to what's happening with rewards right now. And then it's up to the gateway to monitor the performance of each individual agreement and adjust accordingly. But I've left that out of this slide because it comes up in the next slide, which is sort of the sad path. What happens when things go wrong, right? And so agreements can be rejected by indexers before even starting. There's no penalty for that, although that might be taken into account by the selection algorithm from the gateways. Proof of indexing and work done can be disputed. These are meant to be sort of verifiable. So if you're sending the same indexing agreement to a subset of indexers, they should all be posting the same amount of work done. And this can be disputed and go through arbitration the same way that POIs can. And then finally, agreements can be canceled by either the indexer or the gateway at any point for any reason whatsoever, with some considerations so that the amount of work done up to that point by the indexer is still paid out. But essentially, reasons why the agreements might be canceled, as I alluded to before, is that the performance is not the expected by the gateway. So if the gateway is monitoring an indexing agreement and sort of the indexer that picked up that agreement is not performing to the desire, they can cancel that out, and so they can share that agreement with or propose that agreement to some other subset of indexes. And equally, the indexer can sort of bail out of an agreement, either because they're no longer interested in serving that subgraph, or whatever reason. Maybe they're no longer supporting their particular chain. That's really up to them. But there's a way for both parties to back out of the agreement. Okay. So moving on, I've mentioned before indexes selection algorithm, or the selection algorithm, IISA for short. And this is meant to be an algorithm implemented by the gateway to select which indexers receive agreements for which subgraphs. Now, there's a lot of sort of power in this dynamic. Sort of the gateway has a lot of control over this, and sort of the proposal has a canonical implementation of this as part of it, though this being an off-chain component is not strictly part of the GIP. But anyway, one of the main things here is that this IISA needs to balance decentralization with performance. So decentralization being a sort of network concern and performance being a data consumer concern. And so there's a tension here between these two, because we absolutely want to make sure that the highest performing indexes get the most agreements, but we also want to make sure that new indexes get to participate in the network. And so there's a bit of a tension there. So in the proposal, what is discussed is that this IISA will need to take into account quality of service, that being latency, uptime, error rate. It would need to take available stake into concern, or some other measure of economic security. And it could take other concerns as well into account. And sort of the hope is that the gateway sitting in the middle of the relationship between the data consumer and the indexes, and also aggregating a lot of the query volume, means that they have a unique view into past performance by indexes and current performance in aggregate. And they can use those two data points to sort of best pick indexes moving forward. There's another concern as well that is about the data consumer might be there's a lot of variance in what they consume at each point. So the idea is that the gateway would absorb a lot of that variance and ensure that enough indexing agreements are set in place so that when data consumers do come online, the indexing is ready. But I'll talk more about that later. So far, I've been describing the on-chain part of the proposal or of the indexing payment sort of mechanism. Apart from that, and because mainly that's really tied to Graph Horizon, and that's not coming out in Q1, we are working towards a minimum viable product to test a lot of these ideas out that doesn't require new contracts being deployed or any kind of new on-chain interaction. This minimum viable product does require an update to the indexer stack plus opt-in configuration so that the indexer stack can accept indexing agreements. It also requires an upgrade to the agent node gateway. And sort of we're working towards those things. This minimum MVP would also do the payment collection via query routes because that is sort of the payment rails that are available right now. It would use a work done proxy based on entities stored and blocks indexed. So essentially, this means that when an indexer has to report how much work it did to index a subgraph, they will need to report how many entities that subgraph has in storage for that particular epoch, and also how many blocks they had to index within that epoch. And sort of we are working towards setting a price for those two proxies. And we're in the hopes that this proxy works well enough for us to sort of make the agreements feasible for indexers without having to go into a much more precise either compute unit or subgraph subgraph gas metric right now. That being said, this proxy is only meant to be temporary and part of the MVP and maybe the first version of the on-chain contracts. But although not perfect, we're hoping that it allows us to sort of experiment and test out other concepts in the proposal. So with all that being said, this MVP also has a different set of trust implications. This being off-chain completely means that the indexer will have to trust the gateway, that the gateway will pay for sort of the indexing agreements. And the gateway will have to trust to a certain degree, certainly much more than if the on-chain components were implemented, that the gateway will have to trust that the indexer will be reporting the correct amount of work done. And sort of that is a trade-off. There's a trade-off here of speed versus trust. And sort of the idea is to keep this MVP to a rather small set of users to test things out, and then slowly, as we gain confidence and as we secure it more, roll it out to a wider set of indexes, and at the same time work fast towards the on-chain indexing payments, so that everyone can sort of participate in this. So the timeline for releasing these things, if the proposal were to be approved, is essentially the MVP is on track to being ready for late Q1, early Q2 for this year. And the on-chain indexing agreement is, as I said, it requires Graph Horizon, so it'd be a fast follow after Graph Horizon is released. And that's happening later this year. Okay. So as I mentioned, we want to release this MVP based on the work done proxies. As part of that, we need to set a price for the entities stored and the blocks indexed. The idea being that the entities stored roughly map to the storage cost of indexing a subgraph, and the blocks indexed basically map to the amount of compute required to index a subgraph. Again, so we need to set a price for those two things. We're looking at having a flat rate for entities stored across all chains, and then a different price per blocked index per chain. And sort of what we need to do is to get those two price points right, so that the agreements are both economical for the indexer and also make sense from the subgraph developer side. So we are researching the price for the initial batch of indexing agreements. And so we're looking for data on the costs associated with indexing a subgraph or a set of subgraphs in aggregate. We could use either. So please ping me if you'd be happy to have a brief conversation with me to help us make indexing payments a success. I've left my email there. You can reach out either through that or Discord or Slack. But yeah, I'm keen on learning about this. Okay, so that is the end of the presentation. And now I'd like to open up the floor for Q&A.
Fantastic. So in the time that you were doing the presentation, a few questions have come through. Let me just quickly grab a link to the presentation and paste it in the chat if you're open to. Well, actually, would you like? Is that okay for me to do? It would be great to confirm with you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
That's
fantastic. Fine. So I think you're gonna have to make the presentation be accessible via link. I've posted it anyway, so hopefully once you've done that, the link should be functioning. But yeah, let's roll back to the first question that came through. So that comes from Josh, and Josh is asking, will there be place for two amounts per epoch, one for during syncing phase and one for steady state, sorry, since syncing and just querying will have different expected per epoch costs?
Okay. This is there a way I can see the question just so that I can understand the framing, because I think there's something off about it.
Yeah,
or that I didn't get particularly well.
Josh can actually chime in. I think he's on audio now, so go ahead, Josh.
So my question is about the per epoch maximum cost that can be set.
Okay.
In my mind, there would be a very high cost on the indexer during the syncing phase, and a much lower cost during the steady state after it's been synced. So obviously the per epoch maximum would have to be set by the consumer and the gateway, so that it would be able to handle the syncing phase. But it just to avoid any abuse, it makes sense in my mind to have a lower maximum during the steady state phase. Does that kind of clear it up?
So those are two different parameters. If I'm understanding the question correctly, the indexing agreement has two separate parameters, two maximum amount payables. One is for the initial sync, or in this slide I mentioned the initial indexing, but this is all the work done to get from the initial history in the subgraph until chain head. And that is correct. That's going to be a lot higher than the ongoing maximum per epoch. But this is essentially to account for the fact that, yes, there's a lot more work required to do the initial sync than to keep up with every new epoch.
Perfect. Okay, thank you.
And so we understand that. So I didn't really. Maybe this is a good time to cover some of the sort of challenges with this particular approach, and the fact that, for example, if an agreement gets cancelled, that means that a new one needs to be issued to another indexer, and that means that the gateway, and by extension the data consumer, will be liable to pay for another batch of initial indexing. And as you pointed out, that is probably going to be a lot more expensive than indexing ongoing per epoch. And so we're looking at ways of evolving even this version of the proposal to allow for transitioning or sort of minimizing the reasons why agreements would be cancelled. And if they're cancelled, there's even some proposal, some ideas to work towards minimizing that initial cost of indexing. And so, for example, one very clear way why this could become unfeasible, or sort of agreements be cancelled, is variation in GIT to fiat, right? So if GIT becomes a lot more valuable, then all of a sudden the agreements are a lot more expensive in fiat terms, and that might mean that they are uneconomical for the gateway. So the gateway would need to start canceling them and reissuing them, right? And that sort of that can be problematic. But anyway, this proposal doesn't address all of those situations, but we are aware of the shortcomings and are hoping for us to be able to evolve it fast enough to address those down the line.
Wonderful. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm happy to take more questions. I see that Pierre has had another one, but I'm not sure which order we're following, so happy to take your lead on that.
Yeah. I'll generally go from previous question, like so as you were presenting, there was, I was like marking. So the next question after that is from Steak Machine. I can read out, or you can read out. It's up to you. I'm easy.
Yeah. I'll read it out. Don't worry. Is it
okay,
kind of index tips that they got on top of current indexing rewards, or complete replacement? So it's definitely not a complete replacement. Not at all. It might be you could consider it extra supplemental income on top of indexing rewards if you're already indexing that subgraph, or if there's already curation on that subgraph. But it might be the case where you start seeing some subgraphs that are not being curated, but instead indexing agreements are being offered. And in that case, you would have, for that particular subgraph, probably no indexing rewards, but you would get income from indexing agreements if you were to be offered one and accept one. So there's that dynamic essentially at play where it really depends on if the subgraph has been curated on or not, for you to collect income from the two sources or just from one of those two sources. At the same time, this does open the possibility for indexers to serve subgraphs at a profit where there is no indexing rewards being offered on those subgraphs, either because of the feature set that they have or the chain is unsupported or other reasons, right? But rewards are not in all of them.
November. Yeah. Good. Sunday.
I'm sorry, I didn't get that.
No,
Is it just
sorry.
me?
No. Rem was unmuted, so I just muted him. Yeah, all good. Sorry about that.
Okay, I was wondering if I got a follow-up question. If not, I'll move on. Okay, hopefully I've addressed that. But just to be clear, this is not a replacement of the rewards plus curation mechanism. It might be the case where you're getting stream income from both, or you might get from one or the other. So Matthew, I guess there is some sort of timeout as well. Indexers agree to index a subgraph, then goes on vacation for 6 months and never finishes syncing. Yeah, absolutely, Matthew. Like I've tried to keep it simple, and the full spec is not even part of the GAP as of today. But the idea is that we do cover those cases, and we have to allow for this to work for both gateways and indexes. So the indexer needs to be allowed enough time for the initial sync to happen, and not be at risk of losing any payment due for the work they've done up to that point. And the gateway also needs to have some certainty that the agreements that are open are actually being served. Otherwise, it needs to go and shop for other agreements because it doesn't need those subgraphs being served. So your case is obviously a bit exaggerated, 6 months. I'd be hoping that doesn't really happen. But again, the indexer can cancel the agreements. Sorry, the gateway can cancel those agreements if it's not seeing the performance that it expects. Poly B, will this performant data points be added to Graph Explorer for full transparency? It's on Graphs here, but ensure consumers use that. That is a very interesting question. As far as I know, we've looked at the possibility of open sourcing as much of the data that the gateway uses to make the decisions, and sort of the gateway, the indexing, the selection algorithm. I'm not sure if it's going to be added to the Graph Explorer in particular, but maybe at some other way or mechanism. I think the short answer is I would expect so, yes. The idea is that this being driven by an algorithm, it should be transparent, at least for the edge and node gateway. So I have Matthew again. And again, if I answer any of these questions insufficiently, please let me know so I can expand on them. Matthew asks, presumably work performed could be reported regularly during the initial indexing phase to prevent abuse. I think you're talking about the case where the initial indexing takes a long time. So there's some subgraphs that take I believe, in the order of weeks to get indexed. I think the GIP doesn't make any particular stipulation at this point for those cases, and it's going to be more up to the gateway to deal with those cases. So I don't know. Happy to have a chat if this is a concern of yours. Looking for more questions here. Okay. Pierre says, then we have to do agreements per gateway per subgraph. That makes no sense to me. How many subgraphs we have? 10,400. We should have in the protocol to calculate the compute units and adjust to the market demands. Okay, let me go. Let me address this in parts. Do we have to have an agreement per gateway per subgraph? Yes. And so the hope is that this is automated. Sort of the indexers set a minimum amount of GRT they need to be paid per stored entity and per blocked index per chain. And so when the gateway offers an indexing agreement, it's automatically accepted or rejected. And the hope here is that in aggregate, those agreements are profitable. We are aware that it might be the case that some particular agreements in a subset of agreements that you've been offered, some might be losing money, some might be making a lot more money. And sort of the idea is that in aggregate, those turn out to be economical, and that the indexer selection algorithm prioritizes indexes that have picked up sort of a diverse set of subgraphs. Because if we don't have compute units, as you mentioned out, whatever proxy we come up is going to be insufficiently accurate to get every agreement profitable. So we hope that if enough indexing agreements are offered per indexer, this will become sort of a economical in aggregate. I hope I've address that concern. So in short, the acceptance of agreement should be automatic based on parameters that the indexer sets, and then in aggregate, the bag of agreements that has been offered to an indexer should be profitable enough. I know Pierre has, okay, there's a follow-up to this. Cost model that was tried before. I think no one is using as the protocol is adjusting the price dynamically. Look, what I will say about this is that what I've been describing is the proxy for work done, and it is in fact sort of you could view it as a cost model. A market is definitely better. And we are working towards that, but we're not there yet. So the idea is this being a stepping stone to a market, because as you mentioned, like price discovery is if we centralize the setting of the proxy in the agent node gateway, and the proxy is sort of not super accurate, then obviously the price discovery, which is a function of that, will not be optimal. And so we'd rather move away from that as fast as we can. But right now, as it's sort of the best we can do for the MVP. And so there is another stream of work to come up with a subgraph gas experiment, see if we can deterministically understand how much work actually requires to index a subgraph, and then on top of that, build a market but that's sort of down the line and not part of this GIP. I hope I've addressed that. And now I'm going to come back to Vince, who I've skipped over. And sort of his question is, do we average this cost of indexing? The upper bound and bell curve will be extreme. Hertzner versus AWS or 𝗨𝗀𝗪 without putting self-hosted bare metal into the equation. There is a sinking indexing cost, but there is also a requirement cost per network, ETH for terabytes. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so now we're getting into the meaty things, and this is interesting. Look, we'd love to have this conversation with you or anyone that has this concern. We would love to make the initial pricing decision based on as much data as we can. We are aware that there's big indexers that have a very different cost structure than tiny indexers. We want to make sure that the indexing agreement can support a wide range of those. That means it probably means that the indexing agreement will be more profitable for indexers that have economies of scale. But it's not. This is not about sort of leaving the small indexers out of it. It's very much about including them. So again, the more data we have, the better we'll be able to make that decision. And again, as I mentioned, there's decentralization versus performance. You could also view this as decentralization versus cost as a tension in the system. And we would it's a balancing act, but we definitely want to make sure that the smaller indexers, and not only the smaller indexers, but the new up and coming indexers are able to participate in this system. Hope I've addressed that, Vince. And now there's Matthew again. I think indexes should share off-chain amount of space each network takes, and then Gateway can use that for pricing, different per chain. Yeah, so there's RPC costs. There's each subgraph also has a very different amount of store entities to gigabyte sort of ratio. There's a lot of moving pieces. It'd be great to get that data for sure. It'd be also great to understand beyond amount of space for each network, also how much you're paying for that space. Because again, if you're running on bare metal, it's different from Google Cloud or whatever. So we would love to take all of that into account. You've also mentioned, but blocks index can probably cover the size. Gateway knows the start block versus the current block, so can include that in price. I'm not sure if you're referring to the size, which size in particular here. Payway.
I just meant from my previous comment about indexer sharing size or amount of space a network takes. Really, if a subgraph has a start block and the current block, when the gateway sends the price, the amount of blocks that need to be indexed is a kind of indicator of how much space indexer needs to run the RPC node. Because if you ask to index 300,000 blocks in Arbitrum, that's a very different number than, or 300 million rather. That's very different than 18 million in Ethereum, right? So the size of indexing an Arbitrum subgraph would be much. I would expect the gateway to pay a lot more for that than Ethereum, for example. Yeah.
So there's to accommodate for that. There's a different price per block per chain.
Yeah. Exactly.
So that is like we're aware of that, and sort of the proxy has taken that into account. Again, it won't be perfect, but the hopes is that we can make it work. Vince says, I hope someday we can provide archive versus full node. The amount of indexers available would greatly increase, and then we can charge full versus archive needed. which will also drop the price for customers, as many don't need archive support. I guess you're referring to subgraphs that require sort of time traveling. I don't know. I don't have a comment in particular of that in relation to this proposal. But yeah, I think there's room for improvement there, because there's really no little way to tell if consumers will, or how many consumers are actually using the time travel feature. Pierre says, I'm against this proposal at the moment. It's not profitable to index subgraph, and adding time and resources for index to manage these agreements. It should be automated. It makes no sense for a 2 billion market cap crypto project, and it's not aligned with the knowledge graph proposal. Okay. Look, very welcome the feedback. I'm not sure if there's any concern there I can address in particular, but I'd be happy to have a chat.
Pierre, do you want to add some additional context either in the chat or via voice so we can?
Yes. Hi.
Yeah.
Sorry for that. I just think, I'm sorry, I know you do your best to make a proposal, but to a certain extent, I see that there were many change into softwares, updates, and we don't have even the graph node new version debugged and everything. And now there's a proposal for the graph knowledge that's going to be not only Arbitrum or Ethereum, it's going to be knowledge graph. And there's a lot of proposal, but I have the sense that nobody's talking to each other to align their proposals to each other. And as an indexer, I'm a new indexer, I'm not an experienced one, but I see that we already have to look into which one we're going to index, and it takes not weeks. I have some graph that I'm indexing for 3 months. It takes a long time, a lot of resources, and the rewards are not, it's not sustainable right now. Of course, if I have some delegators that will put a lot of money, then it will become maybe somehow profitable. But even Yaniv said that the design of the graph protocol has some lacks, but we are trying to make something over something that some lacks. Fix the lacks, then you can make, but this has to be kind of automated. There's already algorithms that can ask how many gigabytes it takes for this graph to be indexed, how long it takes. You know, all these can be automated somehow with algorithms. And at the end, the indexers are there to serve demands. So some of the indexers are indexing subgraph just because they are better rewards, but not because there's demands. There's no queries for it for them. So I think we're running backwards. When I see that, I'm sorry, but I think the alignment is not as I expect to be. That's my take on it.
I hear you. I don't have anything particular to add in this case. I think.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just commenting on the proposal in
fine.
general. But I see that you want to solve some problems and have many gateways and the gateway, but then it becomes a full-time job. And now, but is it going to be rewarded enough to be sustainable? That's my question. And I don't see it, because I say, okay, how much more GRT we going to receive for doing all this agreements and managements and everything manually, because it has to be somehow. Yeah, I understand that it's a proposal, it has many phases, but the first phase should be, I think you should just put more work on make it more automated somehow with algorithms and consensus protocols and everything. We have already sub radio or that exchange hash about things. So we have a lot of data that you can use to automate these things instead of having indexers makes agreements and maximum this and maximum that, because at the end, if you do that, I see that it's going to be a competition on the price. Now, who's charging the less will win the agreement, but at the end, it's going to be I'm going to have a whole team just to do agreements. There's 10,000 subgraph, and it's going to be more in the future. So it doesn't make sense to me. That's what I'm saying. Maybe you're to align your things more to automations and algorithm that will manage kind of these things. And if it's not perfect at first phase, then you improve them. But to manage this, I'm sorry, it makes no sense to me.
Yeah,
that's my take on it.
Okay.
Can I just say-
yeah, you want to go?
Yeah, all I was just going to say was, yeah, I completely hear where Pierre's coming from, and I can see the frustration from an indexer's perspective. But I wonder, for the purposes of today's conversation, I think there was one question in there about like how it was a general question, but I was thinking maybe we could direct it towards this specific proposal. It was something along the lines of how can we make this sustainable? So maybe as a productive way to kind of answer that and address maybe something more immediate, maybe Matthias, maybe you can address that. I don't know. It's up to you. Yeah.
Yep. No, absolutely. And I think I got another like on the last sort of explanation there from Pierre. I understand now that his concern is around automation. I think maybe I haven't been very clear with my wording at some point, but the expectation here is that the issuing agreement and collection of this indexing agreements is automated. So for the indexer, all that they really need to understand is, or the hopes is that they need to understand and set a price for how much they're willing to be rewarded per entity stored and per blocked index in every chain. And then every agreement that comes across that matches those parameters in it will be automatically accepted by the indexer stack. So if we get that right, if the proxy is good enough, this should be opt-in and automatic from the indexer's perspective. And the hope is that if we get it slightly wrong, it'll be in aggregate profitable for the indexer nevertheless. So again, I just want to clarify that this is meant to be automatic from day zero, and we can work towards making it more precise and more sort of fair in terms of profitability to everyone involved. But the automation is meant to be built in, and it's part of the proposal.
Okay, thank you. The only thing I want you to be aware of is if you put a minimum, there's always going to be an indexer who's going to charge less and it's going to win more because of many reasons. So it's going to be a race to minimums and low price. And at the end, the big indexers will say, I'm done with this and I'm going somewhere else. So if you want to keep the good indexers, you have to be profitable. So there's a calculation that needs to be done, that there's no like indexers that comes up and flash everybody with the minimum price. That doesn't make sense. You understand?
Okay, so at like what I've described as part of the MVP and the probably the first iteration of the on-chain, the price is being set by the gateway, and is one price for every indexer. And so it's really up to the indexer to accept or reject. But it's not like they can lower the price. Now, how the gateway sets the price is really, or exactly which price could the gateway set is something that we are sort of working towards, and that's why I've asked for data and conversation, and we've had several of this already. But the idea is that the gateway sets the price to a point where even newcomer and small indexers are profitable, so that we can include and sort of encourage wide participation in this part of the protocol as well, and to also make sure that this can be decentralized as it can be. Again, the tension there is with performance, but sort of balancing those two concerns is crucial. But decentralization and wide participation of indexers, even the small ones, or not, I wouldn't say even the small ones, especially the small ones, because those are the ones that bring actually decentralization, is sort of the goal here.
Thank you, Matthias.
Okay, I hope I've addressed that. I don't know how we're doing with time. I think there's a couple more questions. I'm happy to address those.
Yeah, we're slightly over, and how I usually do this is just, if there's a conversation that is flowing and there's important questions being answered, provided that you as the presenter you're okay with staying along, then feel free. Everyone else is also free to stay as well, but I understand that people might drop off. So yeah, if we're cool to keep going, let's as feeling the flow, working with it, there you go. Let's just keep going. So yeah, I just want to make sure everything's addressed if you're cool with that.
Absolutely. I'll keep going. I think there's just a couple more. So let's just go with, I think that next one is Luis. It says, list of top subgraphs by rewards by a list of stack incentive heavier subgraphs for new indexers to be profitable at start, push for a better decentralization. I'm not sure where this is. Doesn't need to be a question, just ideas. Okay. I'm not sure what this is getting to. But list of top graph subgraph by reward by a list. Sorry, I'm not really understanding the question, but maybe if you could rephrase it, I'd be happy to address it. Although you do mention it's not a question. And didn't need to be a question to help smaller indexers. No worries. Okay, I think actually that was the last one at this point. Unless anyone has any other concerns, I'd be happy to address them here. If not, you can always reach out to me later on, or just leave a comment in the forum so that everyone can benefit from that. I would be very grateful if indexers do reach out to us directly to help us with the sort of pricing research, which is, as we discussed at length, it is crucial we get that right to ensure broad participation. And that is very important for us. So yeah, please do reach out.
Fantastic. I was just responding to people in there in the chat. Okay, yeah, thank you so much. That was amazing. And thank you so much for being generous with your time to make sure that we get the questions answered for everyone. Wonderful. Well, thank you all for attending today's IOH. We hope you found that very useful, and thank you all for staying on for a little bit extra. I believe those, I guess, were your final words, Matthias, so I'll take this opportunity to say thank you, and thank you to the rest of everyone here, and we'll see you again same time next week. Bye-bye.